All right, so we're ready to begin Chapter 7, which is about the skeletal system. And we'll begin with an introduction and then look at how we classify bones. And we're going to start with bone classification based on shape. So bone is composed of what is referred to as osseous tissue, that prefix os. That means bone. So anytime you see os, you should think of bone. So osteology, I think I've got it written in your notes, but I'll write it here. Osteology, that's the study of bones, and that's an E. Okay, hopefully you can read that. So osseous tissue is a specialized connective tissue. And if you remember connective tissues, they're composed of a specialized cell, along with a ground substance and the protein fibers that make up the extracellular matrix. So in osseous tissue, the four specialized cell types that we see are osteogenic cells. So osteo, that's bone. Genic means beginning. So these are the cells that divide and produce other cells that are going to be fully differentiated and are going to be the bone building cells. So we have osteogenic cells, a kind of cell called an osteoblast. We'll look at osteoblasts and osteocytes later, so I'm going to hold off on that. Osteocytes are just osteoblasts that have grown up. And then finally there's a fourth kind of cell that's an osteoclast. So four kinds of cells that relate to the bone. The extracellular matrix is a little different in bone than it is in most of the other connective tissues. There's very little ground substance in the extracellular matrix. It's not much fluid at all. Instead, we know that it's mostly that bony matrix stuff. So when you look at the bone matrix, what you see is that about a third of it is organic compound. So there are collagenous fibers that are present in bone that help to give it a lot of strength, and then a variety of other proteins. The other 2/3 of the extracellular matrix is inorganic. So if organic is meaning that it's composed of, carbohydrate, protein, that sort of stuff, lots of protein in bone, but the bulk of bone material, 2/3 of it, is not organic materials. It's mostly mineral content. 85% of that 2/3 inorganic component is a form of calcium phosphate called hydroxyapatite. Notice the spelling of appetite there. It's not like, ooh, I'm hungry. It is instead APA-tite. And that's a salt of calcium phosphate. And the other 10% is a salt called calcium carbonate. And then there's some other salts that include the minerals magnesium and sodium and potassium and fluorine and the sulfate ion and the carbonate ion, and the hydroxide ion. So we got lots of different, that should be actually a capital O there on the carbonate. So lots of other salts as well that include these ions in the salt. So we'll look briefly at the function of skeletons, and then we're going to come back and look again. Later on, we'll expand on some of this. But if you were to sit down and come up with a list, I suppose that you would easily get to support and protection and movement. So the bones are big portions of those functions in the body. It's the support for all of the soft tissues of the body. It provides protection for soft tissues and organs that are found encased or nestled inside of bony structures. Thinking here especially brain, the organs of the thoracic cavity, the lungs, the heart. And then especially the reproductive organs, the internal reproductive organs that are all found kind of nestled down in the pelvis. Movement, absolutely. Most skeletal muscles connect to a bone at some point, and they use the bones as levers then. So contraction of a skeletal muscle moves a lever, say Sorry, that background noise is a phone ring in here, and I should have turned off all the phones. So we'll just let it keep going, and I'll keep talking if you can hear me through this. So movement happens when skeletal muscles pull against the bones. One moment, I'll be right back. Wouldn't you know? Now it just took care of itself. So as the bones, or as the muscle contracts, that pulls on the bone, and the bone moves. And then we can lift up stuff and move our bodies and so on. There's a lot of storage related to bones. We store fat as yellow marrow inside long bones, especially. Here's a long bone. That long bone is called the humerus. So in the middle portion of the long bone, we find yellow marrow storing fat. And then in the bony matrix, as we've said before, there's a rich supply of calcium and phosphorus, especially, but also a lot of other ions and mineral content as well. And then the last one, here's a great word for you. Hematopoiesis is the production of red blood cells, or blood cells, not just red blood cells, but all blood cells. Hemato, that's blood. Poiesis, when you see poiesis, always think production. And so we're going to see that term arise throughout the semester as well. So in the red bone marrow, which is found, there's a lot of it here in the hip and at the ends of these long bones and in the sternum. And if we could turn our skeleton around, we could see the scapulae. All of those are locations where red bone marrow is involved in producing blood cells. Okay, so if we're going to classify bones, we can classify them first based on shape. We'll look at other ways to talk about bones too, but we'll start first with shapes. There are long bones, and here's a nice supply of long bones. This would be the femur. Oops, stop that. Here we are, femur. So we have the femur, which is the bone of the thigh. These are the humeruses. Again, so sorry about that. So the femur and the humerus both are long bones. They're longer than they are wide, and these are the bones that we use as levers to move body parts and then to move loads as well. And almost all the limb bones, with the exceptions of the carpals in the wrists and the tarsals of the ankle, and then the patella that we find at the kneecap, other than those sets of bones, all of the limb bones are long bones. So the humerus, the radius, and the ulna in the lower arm, the metacarpals in the palm, and the phalanges in the fingers, those are all long bones. Short bones, and again, this is kind of, we do our best with these definitions, but short bones are roughly equal in both length and width. And they are generally found in really confined places, and they have a lot of joints, a lot of gliding surfaces on them. And so the primary short bones of the body would be the carpals here of the wrist and the tarsals that we find here of the ankle. So again, approximately cube-like bones, not exactly, but close enough. And they're found again in these really confined areas, and so they, because there's so many different bearing surfaces, places where there are joints, you can get a lot of transfer of force and a lot of very complex movement out of these bones. All right, so long bones and short bones. There are also flat bones. Flat bones have broad, flat surfaces. There's usually a slight curve to them. So other flat bones, I've shown here the scapula. Scapula. Here is another flat bone, the sternum. And hopefully you've already learned that the sternum is made of three bones that are fused together. The top bone is the manubrium. The middle bone is easy to remember. Think about it for a second. There's the body. I can spell manubrium here for you, M-A-N-U-B-R-I-U-M, manubrium. And then the most inferior bone of the sternum is called the xiphoid process. There it is, xiphoid process. So these tend to be very flat, clearly, but they can be curved too. So if we think about the parietal bones that make up the cranium, so here would be the brain inside, and here these two bones that form the wall of, and if this is your face here, now it looks like hair. Sorry, but if these are the bones that enclose the sides of the brain case, then those are also flat bones, even though they have a big broad curve to them. So the sternum, the ribs, the scapulae, most of the skull bones are all flat bones. A third bone shape or type are sesamoid bones. The way I remember that term is I think about them as a sesame seed. If you look at sesame seeds on a hamburger bun, they're nice and round. These are the round bones. And frequently they are embedded in the tendon or found in association with a joint capsule. And their role is to protect the tendons from excessive wear. So they form a nice smooth surface that the tendon can move against. And the patella is the only round bone that's found in any human's body, but more round bones regularly develop, especially at the joints between the phalanges. We see round bones there, and they're usually in response to some sort of physical stress to the body. So as those tendons begin to abrade, a bone will develop in that location and help to provide a smoother surface for the tendon to ride against. So flat bones and round bones, the sesamoid bones. And then there are bones that, it's just difficult to come up with a good name for their shape, and so they're just irregular bones. These are the bones that just can't fit easily into another category, and so they have irregular shapes and surfaces that are locations for the attachment of tendons or muscles, or they're bearing surfaces for articulations, for joints. Articulation. You see articulation, you should think in your brain, you should be thinking about joints anytime you see that term, articulation. So, for instance, these processes that come off of the spinous processes coming off of the vertebra. This is a vertebra with its processes. Those lateral processes have bearing surfaces where we see little joints that help to support the movements that are associated with the spinal column. The facial bones of the skull, for instance, the cheekbone here, called the zygomatic, zygomatic. I could have spelled this one. This is the vertebra, or a vertebra. So the zygomatic bone of the cheek, the nasal bone here, the vomer inside, the mandible and the maxilla. These are all irregular bones, whose shape is not so easy to classify. And then the sixth and last kind of bone that we see in the body are referred to as sutural bones because they are found in the places where flat bones connect with each other. And they also take the name wormian bones. I'm imagining there's some guy named Worm, or that's a location. I'm not sure the provenance of that particular term. But wormian bones are bones that form in the areas where sutures are going to be built. So what we're looking at here is a suture. Here's the suture between the two parietal bones of the skull. Back here is the occipital. And parietal, by the way, is spelled just like we spelled it when we were talking about the membranes. So these are the two parietal bones, right and left, and the occipital bone. And this is a location where wormian bones regularly show up. And these are just, as the suture is forming, as the bones are ossifying, and we'll discuss that process eventually, these are just little extra sutures that form that then kind of wall off a piece of the bone. And so, they're irregular boundaries. They're not found in every person, but this guy just happened to have a bunch of wormian bones that developed in these sutures in the skull. So highly variable in appearance and location, so they are not named other than to say that these are sutural bones or wormian bones. All right, so there we are. I'm going to just go back for a second. So that is everything that we have to say here in this first video for you. Again, osseous tissue is bone tissue, and you've just seen the classification of bones based on their shapes. So now we will end. Discard the annotations. What just happened? Really?